Welcome, dear listeners, from wherever you are joining us tonight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you tuning in from?
Tonight, we step into the hidden corridors of history, into stories preserved in silence and ink.
Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening, as the shadows lengthen and the world settles into its quiet repose? I invite you now to step back with me, far from the clamor of the modern age, to a time when the pursuit of the past was viewed less as a hunt for gold and more as a sacred, painstaking conversation with the silent dust of vanished empires. Our tale unfolds beneath the fierce, eternal sun of a remote land, where the earth held its secrets tightly, demanding reverence and patience from those who dared to scratch its surface. And the quiet discipline of early archaeology was born not from speed, but from a profound understanding that haste destroys history. Professor Alastair Thorne was a man carved from stillness, possessing the patience of the ancient cedars that once blanketed the mountain slopes visible far in the distance, and he believed profoundly that every shovelful of earth removed from the great burial mounds or tells should be treated as the removal of a page from a sacred, unseen volume. His small team, consisting mostly of local men accustomed to the rhythms of the arid soil, worked with small hand trowels and fine badger hair brushes, not the heavy picks and relentless dynamism of the treasure seekers who often preceded the true scholars. For they understood that the difference between discovery and destruction was often merely the width of a single human fingertip. Thorne would often stand on the rising ground in the cooling afternoon, watching the meticulous removal of centuries, understanding that they were not merely digging into the ground, but rather peeling back the very skin of time. Layer, slow, deliberate layer, each stratum a chapter in a colossal geological book. The site they labored upon was known locally as the Hill of Whispers, a vast, gentle hump of baked clay and debris that rose perhaps 50 feet from the surrounding plain, but which represented 10,000 years of continuous human dwelling, where civilizations had built upon the ruins of their ancestors until the accumulated weight became a monumental tomb. The air here was thin and dry, carrying the scent of wild thyme and sun-scorched stone, and the only sounds were the soft, rhythmic scrape of the trowel against the hardened mud-brick walls slowly emerging beneath the surface, punctuated occasionally by the delicate, almost maternal sigh of a brush clearing away the fine, insulating dust. To Alastair, the silence of the site was overwhelming, a weight of history pressing down that demanded a quiet, meditative approach, ensuring that they listened to the earth rather than shouting over it with careless implements. He had long insisted that the true reward of their labor was not the glint of gold or the monumental statue that dominated a museum hall, but the small, often overlooked fragments of daily life, the shattered cooking pot, the discarded clay loom weight, the simple stone tool. For these mundane relics offered a more truthful, intimate portrait of the people who breathed and loved in that long-ago era than any royal inscription. He taught his students and laborers to treat a broken shard of painted pottery with the same quiet reverence as a pharaoh's scepter, understanding that the shard was a direct, tactile link to a craftsman whose hand had shaped that clay 4 millennia prior, lending a profound humility to the endeavor. This patient discipline ensured that when a wall was encountered, it was not breached violently, but traced with infinite care, allowing the architectural ghost of the ancient settlement to slowly reveal itself against the merciless blue of the sky. One particularly still morning, as the sun began its relentless climb and the shadows retreated sharply into the narrow trenches, a young worker named Elias, known for his feather-light touch, called out softly, not in excitement, but in a low tone of warning that instantly stilled the entire operation. Elia had been carefully cleaning a floor level belonging to what seemed to be a modest administrative building, scraping away the solidified ash and soil near what had been a doorway, when his small bronze instrument had met not with resistance, but with a sudden, unnerving smoothness. Professor Thorne, moving with the unhurried grace that marked all his actions, descended into the trench, his spectacles catching the harsh light as he knelt beside the discovery, immediately sensing the presence of something fragile and purposefully placed. It was not a large object, perhaps the size of a man's palm, lying flat and flush against the ancient pavement, covered in a thin, millennia-old patina of earth that seemed to fuse it seamlessly to the ground beneath it. With careful, almost surgical motions, Alistair took the smallest brush and began the slow, delicate work of removing the crust, revealing beneath the protective casing the unmistakable, angular edges of a baked clay tablet, still sharp and remarkably intact despite the crushing weight of history that had rested upon it. This moment, the first touch upon an object that had last been handled by an official scribe perhaps 30 centuries before, was always the peak of Alistair's spiritual journey, a feeling that transcended academic curiosity and touched upon the sacred geometry of time itself. The script upon the tablet was cuneiform, a dense pattern of wedges and lines pressed into the damp clay before firing, and though covered lightly in dust, the characters were legible enough to hint at their contents, suggesting not a dramatic poem or an epic battle, but likely a simple inventory or a record of grain delivered to the city stores. Yet it was precisely this mundane quality that imbued the discovery with such extraordinary power, allowing Alistair to momentarily step into the mind of the anonymous administrator who had tallied the accounts on a normal afternoon, worried perhaps about the harvest or the price of olive oil, binding his existence directly to the observer through this fragile, mud-based medium. He gently instructed Elias to stabilize the earth surrounding the tablet, then sent for the careful mapping tools, ensuring that the tablet's precise orientation and depth were recorded before it was finally lifted, an event that would take another hour of concentrated effort. The careful, systematic recording was as vital as the discovery itself, for Alistair taught that an artifact divorced from its context, from the floor it lay upon, the potsherds surrounding it, and the very soil that protected it, was merely an interesting trinket, stripped of its ability to truly speak about the people who made it. Every fleck of dirt removed from the tablet was preserved and sifted, every small stone nearby catalogued, for the relationship between objects often held more meaning than the objects themselves, revealing patterns of commerce, hierarchy, and belief that span the vast, incomprehensible gulf of forgotten years. The sun climbed higher, relentless and demanding, but the small group maintained their quiet vigil, moving only with the deliberation and slowness of monks executing a timeless, necessary ritual, waiting for the precise moment when the artifact could be safely and respectfully freed from its earthen cradle. Finally, the moment arrived, and Alistair, using a thin wooden spatula, separated the tablet from the ancient mud floor, holding it momentarily up to the light. The silence among the workers was absolute. They gazed not upon a piece of earth, but upon a solidified echo of the human voice, now visible after an immense slumber beneath the weight of ages. The professor handled the tablet as if it were spun glass, confirming that its edges were perfect, its message preserved. An infinitesimal whisper of civilization drawn from the profound, deafening silence of the millennia. The professor handled the tablet as if it were spun glass, confirming that its edges were perfect, its message preserved. An infinitesimal whisper of civilization drawn from the profound, deafening silence of the millennia. This was the quiet triumph of the gentle dig, proving that patience and respect could unlock the Earth's memory more successfully than any forceful assault, securing the fragment of the past for the future's careful contemplation, and affirming the profound responsibility held by those who disturb the sacred rest of the forgotten dead. The knowledge contained in that tablet, a mere record of daily commerce, was now rescued from oblivion, waiting only for the careful hand of the epigrapher to translate its silent testimony and add its fragile sentence to the immense, ongoing history of mankind. Later that afternoon, after the tablet was securely wrapped in cotton and placed in a wooden box padded with fine sand, Alastair retreated to the small canvas tent that served as his field study, where the air was hot and thick with the smell of dry paper and ink, and where the light fell perfectly upon his growing collection of maps and meticulously drawn sketches. He spent hours cross-referencing the tablet's depth with the stratification plans, noting the precise layer of occupation to which it belonged, placing it securely within the Middle Bronze Age, a period marked by subtle shifts in urban planning and pottery styles across the region. He traced the wedges on his careful drawing, imagining the reed stylus pressed into the malleable clay, observing how the hand that wrote it had hesitated slightly before inscribing the number for 19 measures of barley, a small human imperfection that annihilated the separation of 3,000 years. This careful plotting of every find, whether magnificent or insignificant, was the cornerstone of Alastair's discipline, the act that transformed mere digging into true scientific inquiry, allowing them to rebuild, intellectually, the collapsed architecture of the ancient world. He often mused that their work was akin to listening to a conversation through the walls of time, where only fragmented sentences survived, requiring the scholar to piece together the original dialogue using context, patience, and absolute fidelity to the few words that remained legible. The Hill of Whispers was slowly giving up its secrets, not in a rush of sensational headlines, but in the steady accumulation of small, verifiable truths, each brushstroke a rejection of the impatient plunderer and an affirmation of the enduring power of gentle curiosity. The shadows of the tents stretched long across the plain as the day cooled, signaling the end of the labor, leaving the vast, silent field to await the return of the gentle, interrogating tools on the morrow. The laborers packed their tools with a respectful quietness, securing the fragile edges of the excavated trenches with temporary barriers to protect them from the relentless wind and the cooling night air, movements performed with an ingrained understanding of the site's vulnerability. Elias, the young man who had found the tablet, lingered near the professor's tent, his face alight not with pride but with a quiet sense of awe, having witnessed the transformation of simple earth into the profound revelation of history, cementing his belief in the seriousness of their shared task. Alastair looked out over the darkening tell, reflecting on the countless lives that had unfolded upon this same soil, lives now reduced to faint architectural outlines and scattered domestic debris, their entire existence contained within the gentle, curved layers beneath his feet. It was this profound realization of continuity and fragility that fueled his meticulous approach, the knowledge that they were the last witnesses to the original arrangement of these long-forgotten objects, and that a single clumsy movement could erase the final remaining testimony of an entire populace. He considered the tablet resting safely inside the box, a small, durable vessel carrying a precise message across the abyssal depths of time. A message of barley and trade that confirmed that even in the height of ancient power, life was centered on the small, manageable details of survival and commerce, tethering the great sweep of history to the simple rhythm of human needs. The professor settled his notes and prepared for the evening meal, knowing that the earth, though disturbed, was still filled with untold narratives, waiting patiently for the gentle hand and the quiet mind to encourage them into the light. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening, as the shadows lengthen and the world settles into its nightly slumber? The sun had finally surrendered its fierce command over the plain, withdrawing beneath the horizon and leaving the Mesopotamian sky drenched in the transient colors of deep amethyst and burnt copper, a magnificent curtain drawn across the vast stage of the desolate landscape. As the camp transitioned from the clamor of the day's work to the quiet organization of the evening, the familiar aroma of simple, nourishing cookery, steamed lentils mixed with wild herbs gathered from the riverbank, began to spread, a comforting scent that strangely mirrored the sustenance prepared by the very people whose long-vanished city they were currently disturbing. Alastair sat amongst his key foremen and the man who had found the tablet, exchanging quiet words of respect and gratitude for the meticulous work performed, recognizing that the greatest discoveries are rarely made by solo genius, but are instead the culmination of disciplined, communal effort guided by patience and profound care for the earth itself. Later, after the communal meal had been consumed, and the campfires had been reduced to a gentle, smoky glow, leaving the scattered tents swallowed by the deepening blue darkness, Alastair withdrew to the small, heavily guarded annex where his maps and the day's critical finds were secured. He ignited a small wick floating in an olive oil bowl, the resultant low, steady light immediately pulling his gaze toward the secured box containing the clay tablet, a small, durable vessel carrying the precise message of an empire now fallen to dust. The profound quiet of the night descended, broken only by the distant calls of the desert scavengers and the muffled rhythmic footfalls of the watchmen circling the perimeter. Figures of modern guardianship standing vigil over the scattered remnants of long-dead kings and forgotten merchants. With the utmost reverence, he lifted the tablet from its protective packing, resting it upon a sheet of crisp, clean parchment, and began the slow, delicate task of clearing the remaining flakes of clinging, compacted soil using a tool fashioned from a fine silver pin and a soft, dry brush. As the last obstructive particles fell away, the cuneiform sign stood out in stark relief. The precise, angular impressions of the stylus, perfectly preserved, communicating across the vast, silent gulf of 4,000 years with startling clarity. Alastair recognized the standardized administrative script immediately. It was not a royal edict, nor a heroic saga, but rather a receipt and ledger entry, detailing the withdrawal of specific quantities of barley from the temple granary for distribution among the laborers involved in the seasonal maintenance of the irrigation canals. This seemingly mundane administrative record struck Alastair with a force far greater than any discovered treasure, for it laid bare the essential, pragmatic engine of civilization, the inescapable necessity of counting, measuring, and administering resources to sustain the populace, proving that even the most monumental structures were dependent on a steady, accountable supply of grain and labor. It offered a window, clear and undistorted, into the daily preoccupations of the ancient bureaucracy, confirming that the lifeblood of this long-forgotten society pulsed not only through the temples and palaces, but also through the organized, documented movement of goods necessary for survival and the continuity of the state. He spent nearly an hour comparing the tablet's numbers and names against the existing chronological lists, anchoring this newfound witness firmly within the known history of the region, and confirming its date to the waning years of the Isin-Larsa period. As he meticulously copied the text onto his documentation scroll, translating the rigid Akkadian into eloquent English, Alastair felt a distinct connection to the unnamed scribe who had pressed those very wedges into the soft clay, perhaps feeling the late afternoon heat pressing down upon his own shoulders as he finished his daily accounts. He noted a slight imperfection near the lower right corner, a gentle blurring of a few signs, possibly caused by a moment of inattention or a sudden jostle, a tiny error that nonetheless served as a momentary lapse of professional decorum, suddenly transforming the anonymous functionary into a recognizably tired human being. This small accidental trace of humanity, preserved through millennia, offered a poignant counterpoint to the tablet's otherwise sterile accounting, offering a silent, unexpected whisper about the real person behind the formal record. He considered the contrast between the fleeting nature of human endeavor and the extraordinary durability of fired clay, musing on the immense luck that had shielded this fragile account from the twin destructors of water and wind over so many epochs, preserving its story until the precise moment of their own gentle intervention. The weight of this responsibility settled upon him anew. The knowledge that they were not merely finding objects, but resurrecting voices, and that every decision they made regarding the site's interpretation would shape the narrative of these lives for generations yet unborn. The tablet offered a key to understanding the very foundations they were excavating, the granaries, the housing blocks, and the paths of trade, providing the names and the purposes for the silent architecture now emerging, like fractured memory from the earthen layers. Outside, the imposing silhouette of the excavated tell loomed, a vast, silent archive of accumulated time, its sloping sides marked by the delicate grids and trenches of their investigation, each section representing a calculated risk and a measured descent into the depths of history. Alistair stepped out briefly into the cool night air, tilting his head back to gaze at the impossibly bright, ancient stars that had served as the sole consistent celestial witness to the entire lifespan of the city resting beneath his feet. He allowed the profound, cleansing silence of the desert to enter his soul, pushing back the intellectual exhaustion and confirming his resolve to approach the next day's labor with the same meticulous caution, treating the dust not as inert matter, but as the final, delicate wrapping paper of time. As the first rays of sunlight struck the ridge, the small team gathered, their movements practiced in silence, communicating complex instructions often through the simple raising of an eyebrow or the careful positioning of a trowel, a testament to months spent in shared, quiet labor under the relentless sky. The excavation recommenced with the utmost delicacy, using small brushes and hand spades rather than brute force, peeling back the layers of millennia-old refuse and collapsed roofing material as one might turn the fragile, dry pages of an ancient text whose coherence depended entirely upon the preservation of its physical order. They worked slowly downward, following the discernible change in soil color and texture. The darkened earth that spoke of ash, organic decay, and the remnants of everyday use, which clearly outlined the floor level of the former dwelling, the true point of daily life upon which all subsequent layers rested. Mid-morning brought the sun's full strength, transforming the gentle breeze into a furnace breath, but also bringing a noticeable change in the physical strata they were revealing. The workers began encountering fewer shards of common utilitarian pottery and more fragments of polished, harder stone, a material unsuited for simple household tools or ordinary storage vessels, suggesting a shift in the function of this small space. This area of denser, cleaner earth suggested a feature that had been either sealed or carefully filled in shortly after the building's abandonment, preserving the lower stratum from the casual mixing and disturbance of later debris and the intrusions of burrowing creatures. The scholar paused immediately, instructing the team to switch from spades entirely to the finest archaeological brushes and dental picks, recognizing that they were approaching a feature that demanded reverence and microscopic attention, a deliberate deposit of some importance. The painstaking clearing revealed not just a simple earth floor, but the intact corner of a meticulously crafted, small stone platform, entirely inconsistent with the humble mud brick construction of the surrounding dwelling units and their reliance on simple packed earth surfaces. The platform stones were smoothly dressed and tightly fitted, indicating a deliberate, expensive construction choice that spoke either of religious observance within the home or the secure, careful storage of irreplaceable goods, far exceeding the necessities of a barley farmer's routine existence. Furthermore, tucked tightly beneath the lower lip of the platform, the team uncovered a small, cylindrical terracotta tube sealed perfectly with thick, dried pitch, clearly indicating a conscious effort to protect the contents from both moisture and the intrusion of the fine, pervasive desert dust. The thrill of discovery was immediately tempered by the intense imperative for caution. This object had remained inviolate and undisturbed for thousands of years, and a careless touch or an eager hand could shatter the physical manifestation of its secret, destroying the history it held in its fragile form. The scholar carefully documented the tube's precise position, photographing it from multiple angles under measured sunlight, ensuring that every measurement relative to the stone platform and the surrounding walls was perfectly recorded before attempting any physical removal. He lifted the tube himself, wrapping it immediately in soft, acid-free linen cloth, feeling the reassuring, compact weight of the object that had been placed there by hands long turned to dust, realizing that he was now completing a final, intended act of preservation across the vast gulf of time. That evening, sheltered from the increasing strength of the desert wind that whispered across the site, the scholar prepared to open the sealed tube, setting out his finest steel instruments and magnifying glass on a clean wooden table, transforming the simple canvas tent into a temporary laboratory of historical unveiling. The pitch seal was rigid and brittle, requiring careful chipping and softening with faint, controlled warmth, the air filling with the faint, medicinal scent of ancient resin as he worked the barrier away with agonizing slowness, intent on preserving the seal as an artifact in itself, a crucial piece of evidence regarding the burial process. Finally, after hours of delicate work, the ancient stopper loosened, revealing a narrow opening through which the distinct, dry rustle of rolled papyrus could be heard, confirming that this was no mere container for coins or oil, but a true vessel of recorded thought and written intention. With tremendous care, using specialized small brass tongs designed for handling fragile documents, he coaxed the rolled papyrus free, finding it surprisingly intact, though darkened and stiffened by age, retaining the deep curve imposed by its long confinement within the narrow cylinder. He realized immediately that the extreme fragility of the document demanded immediate preservation and a slow process of relaxation. It could not be flattened fully without risk of shattering into fragments, thus requiring hours of meticulous, humid treatment to gently relax the fibers before the text could be safely unrolled and read. Yet even in its tightly rolled state, a few clear, powerful lines of deep red hieroglyphic script were visible on the outside edge, suggesting a nature far different from the mundane administrative records or simple household receipts usually found in these domestic settings. The visible symbols were not the expected signs for grain, livestock, or taxes, nor were they common legal contracts, but rather symbols related to the great cyclical movements of the heavens, coupled with a rare, archaic glyph associated with the concept of the hidden journey or the unseen path of the soul. This unique inscription immediately elevated the artifact beyond common discovery, suggesting the dwelling, or at least this particular hidden corner of it, was perhaps the abode of an astronomer priest, a dedicated mystic, or a seeker of esoteric knowledge who possessed specialized texts unavailable to the average citizen. This finding powerfully challenged the initial assumption of a purely agricultural village, proving that even within the humblest urban layout, layers of complex, stratified spirituality and intellectual pursuit could coexist, carefully hidden just beneath the surface of the ordinary. The preservation of such a specific esoteric text, sealed and buried within the foundation rather than merely discarded in the refuse pit, spoke volumes about the tremendous value ascribed to its contents by the person who had last touched it, treating it as a sacred deposit rather than mere detritus. The scholar sat back in his chair, letting the lamplight illuminate the faint lines of the ancient writing, contemplating the singular mind that chose to bury cosmic secrets alongside the mundane records of daily survival, a testament to the persistent human need to connect the fleeting earthly life with the eternal, measured movements of the spheres above. The meticulous care of the burial, juxtaposed against the simplicity of the home, illustrated the profound truth that deep wisdom and contemplation are often found far removed from the marbled, guarded halls of royalty or the obvious centers of power. Knowing that the full translation would require undisturbed focus and the utilization of specialist linguistic tools not immediately available in the field camp, he carefully prepared the papyrus for stable transport, placing it within a specially constructed cedar-lined box designed to maintain constant humidity and temperature. This single scroll, smaller than a man's forearm, now represented an unprecedented opportunity to hear a voice previously silent, a personal theology or astronomical observation from an ordinary life thousands of years ago, promising a unique and intimate window into the intellectual and spiritual life of the period. He felt a profound, almost overwhelming connection to the unknown scribe, sharing a silent, profound moment across the vast emptiness of the centuries, unified entirely by the shared human language of symbolic meaning and the search for cosmic order. The next day, the digging resumed, but with an altered perspective informed by the secrets the platform had reluctantly yielded. The focus shifted from merely documenting walls and floors to searching for other deliberate deposits, recognizing that the inhabitants had treated their home as a library of sealed memories. They broadened the search area around the original platform, using long, fine probes to test the density of the earth, seeking any unnatural compactness that might indicate another small burial or a filled-in chamber dedicated to sacred storage rather than waste. The slow, rhythmic scrape of the trowels against the dust now seemed less like a simple physical labor and more like a continuous, searching whisper, calling softly to the deeper echoes hidden within the silent, warm earth, asking what other quiet testimonies remained waiting to be heard. They spent the entire afternoon meticulously clearing the immediate area surrounding the home's entrance, often the site of threshold rituals or protective deposits in ancient cultures, removing layers of hardened mud and sun-baked animal dung that had solidified over the centuries. Just as the shadows began to stretch long across the desert floor, hinting at the coming end of the day's light, one of the younger laborers let out a soft cry of surprise, having encountered something unusually smooth and resistant beneath the blade of his small tool. It was not stone or brick, but a perfectly preserved piece of wooden carving, partially carbonized and darkened by time, yet retaining its intricate ceremonial form, lying face down just beneath the doorway threshold. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? The lead scholar, Master Kalin, approached the young laborer's discovery with a quiet reverence, his usual brisk movements slowing to a meditative crawl as he knelt beside the excited youth. He carefully brushed away the remaining earth using a soft, fine camel hair brush, exposing the full extent of the artifact, which rested exactly where the ancients believed the spiritual barrier between the profane and the sacred began, marking the precise line of the threshold. The realization was met not with shouting or a scramble, but with a deep, communal silence, recognizing that they had momentarily interrupted a slumber that had lasted for 30 centuries, and every movement thereafter had to honor that profound and quiet rest. The wood, likely cypress or a similar slow-burning timber, prized for its spiritual resistance to decay, had been shaped into the stylized form of a serpentine guardian, its mouth slightly open in a silent, permanent hiss, intended specifically to ward off harmful energies seeking entry. Though fragile, the lines of the carving were still clear, etched with geometric precision that spoke of skillful hands and long-held artisanal tradition, confirming the object was not an item of daily use, but a deliberate votive offering designed to protect the home and its dwellers from unseen threats. It seemed the carving was not merely dropped or lost amidst the rubble, but gently placed and ceremonially covered, waiting patiently for the moment its long duty would finally be relieved by the turning of the ages. Kalen instructed his team to immediately cease all other broad digging in the vicinity, dedicating the last reserves of the day's light solely to mapping and lifting this significant deposit, understanding that a single threshold offering often meant that corresponding protective measures would be found at other key structural points within the dwelling. If the doorway was guarded against the intrusion of malice, then the very heart of the home, the place of cooking, warmth, and gathering, must also hold its own sealed secrets, waiting for their gentle inquiry and recognition. The discovery affirmed their growing hypothesis. These ruins were not merely abandoned shells of sun-dried mud, but meticulously consecrated spaces, each deposit marking a specific prayer, an intimate memory, or a historical event within the long lifespan of the family who once resided there. As the desert air cooled rapidly and the sun dipped completely beneath the distant, purple ridge of the high plateau, casting the site into a soft, lunar glow, Kalen carefully lifted the carving, treating the ancient wood with meticulous care and wrapping it quickly in a linen cloth dampened lightly with purified water to stabilize the fragile ancient material. They retreated momentarily to the edge of the excavation, where the sturdy oil lamps had been lit, the flickering light catching the deep grain of the wood as Kalen began the detailed process of visual inspection and painstaking drawing for the record keepers. He noted the precise orientation of the serpentine guardian, its head pointing resolutely outward toward the path of approach, a clear and unmistakable sign that its function was purely apotropaic, intended to expel evil rather than invite benevolent spirits inward. With the crucial threshold offering secured and meticulously documented, the team then turned its collective attention inward, moving slowly toward the remnants of the central hearth, marked now by a deep, charcoal-stained circle impressed into the packed earth floor, its ash long since consolidated into hard gray silt. This hearth had been the very axis around which all domestic life revolved, the source of light and darkness, the protector against the cold, and the primary conduit for shared nourishment, making it the most logical place for a corresponding deposit related to prosperity, fertility, or the enduring continuity of the family line. They began the slow, arduous process of clearing the hardened, compressed refuse that had accumulated within the hearth pit itself over centuries of use and abandonment, using small wooden scrapers and brushes that at first yielded only dry dust and small flakes of burnt residue. Just when fatigue threatened to dull their senses in the deepening twilight, and the rhythm of scraping felt mechanical and fruitless, the sound changed abruptly beneath the blade of a scraper from the dry whisper of ash to a dull thud against unusually compacted clay, indicating a void or a cavity purposefully created and filled beneath the cooking surface. Carefully, Kalen himself took the tools, working with the immense delicacy of a master sculptor finalizing a statue, until he exposed a small, perfectly spherical depression at the very base of the hearth pit, just below the deepest point of the fire's intensity, where the greatest heat had resided. Within this protective hollow, shielded carefully from the searing heat by a thin layer of tightly packed, untouched clay, rested a modest, unbaked clay jar, stoppered tightly with blackened pitch, far too pristine and delicate to have been mere cooking or storage ware. The air grew perceptibly heavy with anticipation, and the younger laborers instinctively held their breath as Kalen gently rotated the clay vessel in his hands, which yielded a faint, dry, rattling sound, confirming it contained more than just air or dust sealed within its fragile walls. Using a sliver of polished bone, he began the meticulous work of chipping away at the aged pitch that sealed the lid, knowing instinctively that the sudden introduction of 30 centuries of external air pressure could shatter the delicate contents within the sealed darkness. When the lid finally yielded with a soft sucking sound, revealing the dark, protected interior, the lamplight shone brightly upon a cluster of perfectly preserved ancient grains, millet and barley still golden, alongside 3 small, beautifully polished river stones, each placed deliberately to represent a member of the residing family unit. This new perspective demanded a complete alteration of their technique, replacing the robust picks and trowels that had initially scraped away the surface debris with fine camel hair brushes, small wooden spatulas, and delicate dental probes, intended only to remove the dry, settled dust particle by particle. The pace of work slowed considerably, becoming a meditative, rhythmic scraping against the unyielding earth, forcing the scholars to adjust their minds to the measured tempo of the ancient builders who had taken such care to conceal these treasures thousands of years prior. Elias ordered the careful mapping of the exact location and orientation of every single grain found within the offering jar, recognizing that even the tilt of a barley kernel might hold a key to understanding the cosmology of the family that once sheltered within these now silent walls, ensuring the context was recorded as diligently as the artifact itself. Following the baked mud wall of the dwelling unit outward, the team traced a small, low archway that led into an adjoining, smaller chamber, which subsequent exploratory soundings suggested held a compacted, specialized floor material, distinct from the domestic earthen surface of the main residence. This supplementary room, sheltered from the high sun and showing evidence of far more concentrated heat damage, immediately suggested a function dedicated to practical craft or specialized industry, perhaps serving as a private workshop or a place where tedious, careful labor was conducted away from the main family hearth. The air within this smaller space felt drier and tighter, lacking the slight lingering scent of ancient cooking smoke that still faintly permeated the main dwelling, confirming its specialized purpose, separate from the core rhythms of eating and sleeping. Beneath a thin, brittle layer of finely settled ash, different in composition from the domestic refuse, the delicate work revealed the next significant cache, not of grains or implements of agriculture, but of tools essential for detailed refinement and artistic creation, instruments used for shaping and coloring. They uncovered several remarkably well-preserved bone needles, sharpened to an almost surgical point, lying alongside thin, crescent-shaped shards of polished obsidian, clearly used as cutting or etching instruments for intricate carving on wood or soft stone. Resting carefully against the wall, they also found 3 small, shallow clay saucers holding traces of intensely colored mineral pigment, a deep, vibrant ochre red, a pale, celestial blue derived from lapis, and a striking, earthy black crafted from powdered charcoal, all waiting patiently for the touch of water and oil to bring them back to life. The discovery of the mineral pigments particularly excited the team, as color was often the most ephemeral element of an ancient civilization, typically fading entirely or washing away over the millennia. Yet here the concentration was still potent, testifying to the extreme care taken in their initial preservation. These colors spoke immediately of ornamentation and identity, suggesting the artisan who worked here was dedicated to tasks far more significant than simple utility, perhaps involved in the decoration of sacred masks, ceremonial textiles, or the adornment of the dwelling itself, weaving human meaning into the very fabric of their surrounding world. Elias gingerly sampled a small amount of the blue pigment, noting how the grains were meticulously ground to an impossibly fine powder, indicating a high level of skill and an investment of extraordinary time in preparation, reflecting the high value placed upon visual expression within this community. Nestled directly amongst the pigments and cutting tools lay a smaller, wholly unique artifact, a piece of local clay fired only lightly, carefully wrapped in the dusty remains of what must have been tightly woven plant fiber, providing a gentle cradle of protection. When the last vestiges of the fiber were cleared away, they saw a miniature sculpted figure, standing barely the height of a man's thumb, rendered with simple yet powerful strokes, depicting an androgynous human shape. The figure stood stoically upright, its face smooth and featureless in the manner of deep repose, and its tiny sculpted arms were crossed purposefully over its chest, signifying either protection of the heart or profound, quiet introspection, radiating a deep sense of tranquil self-possession. This figurine was immediately recognized not as a deity to be worshipped, but as a representation of the inner self, the essential spirit or the dedicated focus of the artisan who had labored in this very spot, perhaps serving as a meditative anchor during long, repetitive hours of delicate work. It symbolized the necessary fusion between the physical act of creation and the spiritual state required to achieve true mastery. A quiet reminder that the quality of the finished product mirrored the integrity and composure of the hands that shaped it, reinforcing the profound connection between the individual soul and their contribution to the collective community. The figure represented that quiet center which allows one to endure the tedium of meticulous craftsmanship, safeguarding the focus and spirit against fatigue and doubt, linking the worker to the eternal source of all creative impulse. The concentration of spiritual significance beneath the mud floors seemed to increase with every passing foot, for directly beneath the small, carefully placed figurine, the team uncovered yet another deliberate feature etched into the hardened earth itself. This was not a buried cache, but a subtle, complex pattern created by embedding hundreds of minuscule smooth river pebbles into the damp clay before it dried, forming a large, precisely executed continuous spiral motif that began at the center point and uncoiled slowly outward, demanding the full attention of the eye. This painstaking arrangement confirmed that the ground beneath one's feet was viewed not as mere dust, but as a canvas for communicating enduring cosmological truths, serving as a subtle grounding mandala for the artisan who spent their life working above it. The spiral, a symbol recognized across countless archaic cultures, spoke eloquently of the cyclical nature of existence, the eternal journey inward toward the source of being, followed by the inevitable expansion outward into the world of manifestation, creation, and decay, only to return once more to the still center. It was a visual representation of time itself, not as a linear, rushing river, but as a constantly turning wheel, assuring the worker that their efforts, no matter how small or specialized, were fundamentally interwoven with the grand, unending rhythms of the cosmos. This artistic gesture confirmed the understanding that the labor performed here transcended commerce, elevating the artisan's daily toil into an act of meditative participation in the vast, cosmic flow of continuous becoming. He carefully investigated the surrounding earth near this subtle, polished indentation, gently lifting a large, flat, slate-like stone that had been placed strategically to cover a specific section of the floor, clearly intended to conceal whatever lay beneath, rather than merely acting as a weight or support. As the stone was raised, it revealed not a hidden jar of grains or a precious metal offering, but a simple cavity hollowed out of the earth, carefully lined with clean, white river sand, within which rested only a single object. A worn, smooth pestle fashioned from deep green serpentine, its surface marred by countless thousands of hours of grinding, polishing, and intense preparation. This was the final, most personal tool, the very instrument used to transform raw minerals into the vibrant colors discovered nearby. The serpentine pestle was heavy and cool to the touch, possessing a profound ergonomic shape that perfectly fit the hand, bearing the unmistakable patina of continuous use, confirming it as the most trusted and valued tool of the ancient artisan, the primary instrument of their trade and their livelihood. To bury such a necessary and worn tool rather than a showy ornament spoke of the highest level of personal sacrifice and dedication, suggesting that when the artisan's life or work had ended, this essential instrument was respectfully retired with honor, deemed too sacred and too imbued with the life force of its owner to ever be used by a stranger's hand. It served as a final, quiet testament to a life lived fully through creation, anchoring the spirit of the craftsman to the eternal earth that bore the materials they so skillfully transformed. Elias knelt beside the cavity, reverently documenting the pestle's placement and the purity of the white sand lining the shallow grave, recognizing the immense spiritual weight carried by this simple worn stone, which had once channeled the skill and patience of a life dedicated to beauty. The act of concealing this most useful object beneath the earth, rather than leaving it abandoned on the surface, reflected a deep and highly developed respect for the tools of creation, treating them not as mere extensions of the body, but as collaborators in the act of bringing spirit into material form. The silence of the abandoned workshop was now filled with the imagined, rhythmic sound of the pestle grinding against the mortars, an endless, gentle echo of ancient industry dedicated to art and faith. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? Elias rose slowly, the ache in his knees forgotten beneath the weight of his profound contemplation, and he carefully replaced the soft white earth, sealing the worn pestle back into its intended repose, trusting that the centuries of dust and quiet time would remain its faithful, unseen guardians until the next epoch. He felt an intense kinship, not with the grand kings or military leaders often celebrated in monumental carvings and public records, but rather with this quiet, dedicated soul, whose life was measured not in conquest, but in the slow, patient perfection of color and form, a true and humble devotee of the subtle, demanding craft. The careful, respectful retirement of this most essential tool suggested a civilization that valued its patient creators perhaps more highly than its destroyers, understanding that true and lasting legacy rests in the things built to endure, not merely the battles swiftly won and immediately forgotten by the shifting winds of history. Moving away from the central grinding floor, which bore the shallow marks of endless labor, Elias directed Jonas, his quietest and most observant apprentice, to meticulously map the layout of the innermost chamber, a small, dark recess situated deep within the structure, suggesting a storage vault or perhaps a space reserved only for final, solemn consecration. The air within this small annex was noticeably drier than the rest of the ruined complex, almost brittle and sharp, a condition that often favored the exceptional preservation of delicate, sometimes organic materials, leading Elias to approach the undisturbed clay floor with an enhanced measure of deliberate caution and sharpened professional anticipation. The walls of the small space were surprisingly bare of the usual faded sketches or instructional designs seen elsewhere in the workshop, hinting that whatever occurred within these specific four walls was either far too sacred to be visually recorded or was meant solely for the immediate, highly tactile experience of the master craftsman. Just beneath a thin, cracked crust of packed soil in the chamber's farthest corner, Jonas unearthed a tightly grouped series of 3 small, perfectly spherical ceramic vessels, each sealed meticulously with a hardened clay stopper, impressed with a simple, unmistakable symbol depicting the unity of the sun and the crescent moon. The craftsmanship was subtle but exquisite, clearly designed not merely for holding substance temporarily, but for preserving the very essence and potency of its contents indefinitely, suggesting that what lay within was precious far beyond the common materials used only for everyday decoration or simple pigments. Elias carefully lifted the vessels, noting their unusual lightness, which belied the smooth density of the glaze, and felt the distinct, ancient chill that deep age imparts to objects long separated from the warmth of immediate human touch, yet still holding the residual, purposeful energy of the hands that formed them. With painstaking slowness and using a delicate, pointed bone probe, Elias worked the clay seal free from the lip of the first vessel, allowing the tightly contained atmosphere of millennia to exhale slowly into the dim workshop air, a release that was surprisingly immediate and profoundly affecting to the sensitive scholar. A deep, highly resonant saffron dust, shockingly vibrant in its hue, lay packed within, its rich color undimmed by the relentless passage of ages, seemingly waiting only for the renewed warmth of light to reawaken its former brilliance and usefulness for the creation of sacred art. The subtle fragrance that immediately followed was faint but entirely undeniable, a complex mingling of dry, mineral earth, rich preserved binding oil, and a sharp, sweet note of rare crushed blossom, instantly transporting the scholar across the vast chasm of time to the bustling, scented moment of the pigment's creation. The second jar, when its seal was broken, yielded a substance far more valuable than gold in the material world of ancient color, a fine, almost impossible cerulean powder, likely ground from the highly prized lapis lazuli stone, a rare material known to travel vast and perilous distances from the distant eastern mountains to reach the artistic centers of this valley. This deep, celestial blue was meticulously reserved only for the rendering of the most sacred figures, the flowing garments of the greatest gods, or the expansive, star-studded dome of the night sky, signifying not merely immense monetary expense, but a binding spiritual contract between the painter and the divine subject of their patient work. Elias marveled at the microscopic shimmer held within the powder, recognizing with quiet certainty that every infinitesimal particle had been painstakingly reduced and perfected by the very pestle he had just reverently reinterred, presenting a tangible, undeniable connection between the discarded tool and the preserved, perfect fruit of its solitary labor. The third vessel contained not a pigment, but a thick, viscous, dark amber liquid, likely a highly specialized drying oil or a carefully blended adhesive resin, essential for binding the fine powders to the prepared surfaces and ensuring their longevity against the harsh kiss of the dry, unforgiving desert air. This binding medium was the final, secret ingredient, the silent alchemical marriage that transformed mere colored earth into eternal illumination, reflecting the artisan's profound understanding of material science interwoven seamlessly with high spiritual practice. Elias realized that the master of this quiet workshop was not merely a skilled laborer who mixed colors, but a kind of high priest of artistic creation, responsible for preparing and sanctifying the sacred colors and ensuring their physical and spiritual permanence, effectively guarding the very visual manifestation of the gods themselves within their painted narratives. Having meticulously documented the contents of the three sacred vessels, Elias's gaze settled upon a large, flat slab of polished basalt set securely into the center of the earthen floor, standing distinctly apart from the roughness of the surrounding packed clay, appearing far too substantial and too carefully placed to merely serve as a convenient temporary workbench. It was deeply worn, but not with the repetitive circular motions characteristic of the grinding area outside, rather with long, straight scores and small, precise indentations, suggesting a surface used for the final, critical measuring, stretching, or cutting of highly delicate and valuable materials, perhaps precious silks or the finest linen panels for painting. This central stone felt undeniably like the enduring altar of the workshop, the final stage where raw, intense intention met perfect, controlled execution, where the prepared pigments and oils were finally brought into contact with the surface they were destined to adorn with eternal images. As Elias circled the central basalt slab, his attention was momentarily diverted by a subtle irregularity in the stonework of the north wall, where a single, slightly discolored block of smooth limestone sat just above head height, casting a shadow subtly different from its rough-hewn neighbors in the fading afternoon light that filtered through the narrow doorway. Unlike the roughly textured stone surrounding it, this single block possessed a smooth, highly finished surface and bore two meticulously drilled holes near its base, holes clearly intended not for structural support, but for the careful insertion of wooden pegs or small metal fixtures used for manipulation. The scholar immediately recognized this subtle deviation as a deliberate measure of concealment or access, suggesting that the most personal or highly protected artifacts and philosophical writings of the master artisan might not be buried in the floor, but rather secured vertically, hidden from casual view, within the very fabric of the ancient wall itself. Signaling Jonas to retrieve the smallest wooden wedge and a padded lever, Elias approached the wall with the acute focus of a man attempting to decipher a crucial sentence written in a lost, sacred script, analyzing the fine mortar lines and the subtle resistance of the potentially movable limestone block. He inserted the sharp edge of the wedge into the finest joint beneath the stone, applying minimal, patient pressure, seeking only to test whether the block was fixed rigidly in place or merely rested passively against the chamber wall, ready to be carefully drawn out and examined. The stone offered a shallow, yielding sigh and shifted ever so slightly, confirming Elias's profound suspicion that it was not a structural component, but a carefully placed cover, acting as a discreet door or perhaps the massive lid of a hidden repository, guarding a treasure that was not metallic or jeweled, but entirely intellectual and spiritual in its nature. With a final, controlled and gentle shift, the heavy limestone block slid inward a mere fingertip's width, revealing a deep, dark, and perfectly dry alcove proportioned precisely to hold a few precious objects. Tucked within the recess lay a tightly bound bundle of papyrus scrolls, resting securely atop a small gleaming metal object that seemed to catch and concentrate the faint, filtered light of the interior. The contrast was immediate and striking to the eye. The frail, preserved paper holding the artisan's intricate thoughts and most secret technical formulae, protected and preserved by a metallic implement crafted with meticulous, purposeful precision. This hidden chamber was clearly the master's inner sanctum, the silent convergence of their manual skill and their private intellectual life, a space meant for no one else to see, containing the very essence of their methodologies and their most refined artistic philosophy. Elias carefully withdrew the metal object first, recognizing it immediately as a beautifully crafted bronze compass and stylus combination, its legs hinged with a miniature precision that spoke of dedication not only to free artistic expression, but also to the sacred geometry that underpins all monumental and sacred design. Unlike the rougher tools found outside in the grinding areas, this instrument was polished to a near-mirror sheen, showing signs of delicate, consistent use, suggesting it was employed for the critical initial measurements and defining lines that established the foundational harmony of the great painted narratives. The smooth, cool metal rested heavily in Elias's palm, a potent, silent testament to the countless hours spent plotting the divine proportions of figures and temples, ensuring every depiction adhered perfectly to the eternal, unchanging laws of balance and symmetry. Next came the scrolls, fragile cylinders of brittle papyrus, carefully protected from the insidious moisture of the centuries by a thin outer wrapping of treated leather, which had sacrificed its own structure to ensure the preservation of the inner script and knowledge. Elias held them with the utmost reverence, understanding that these were not mere commercial accounts or administrative records of goods, but potentially the very notebooks, formulae, or even the meditative poetry of the master artisan, offering a direct, unmediated window into the precise workings of their gifted mind. The chance to read the personal, private reflections of a craftsman who lived 4 millennia prior, whose daily work was evidenced by the dust of saffron and the shard of lapis lazuli nearby, represented the profoundest and most cherished communion with the ancient past imaginable for a dedicated scholar. Placing the scrolls gently upon the central basalt slab, the artisan's altar, Elias carefully unrolled the outer edges of the uppermost document just enough to glimpse the elegant, tightly formed hieroglyphs pressed onto the papyrus fiber, noticing immediately that the script was not the formal, standardized carving script used in public monuments, but a fluid, almost personalized cursive meant for rapid notation and private, continuous study. The signs spoke immediately of deep contemplation and technical refinement, containing not just instructional diagrams, but perhaps the spiritual guidance the master followed to ensure that his skilled hands were merely the pure, perfect instruments guided by a higher, unseen force. This moment, suspended delicately between physical discovery and intellectual translation, was the quiet, potent climax of the entire excavation, where the physical echoes of the earth finally transformed themselves into the undeniable, immediate whisper of a human voice. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? Elias did not dare to disturb the profound stillness of the chamber with an outburst of human excitement, but instead beckoned with a slow, deliberate gesture to his trusted colleague, Kemet, indicating that the lamp needed to be raised higher, shedding its warm, steady light directly upon the aged fiber, but never touching the delicate edges of the scroll. The air in this sealed vault had been the only preservative, a fragile, invisible guardian holding back the centuries. And every breath taken now felt like a risk, a potential betrayal of the quiet pact made between the living and the long-departed soul who had penned these intimate words. Carefully, using thin ivory weights polished smooth by time, Elias anchored the edges of the brittle papyrus, allowing the script to lie flat and legible, presenting the accumulated wisdom of the artisan not as a monumental proclamation meant for the ages, but as a confidential whisper intended only for the quietest ear. The scholar's eye, trained over decades in the difficult language of the ancient masters, began the slow, delicate dance of translation, pulling meaning from the tightly packed signs that flowed across the page like a stream of dark ink upon the pale, straw-colored river reed, forming words that spoke immediately of devotion. The initial lines spoke not of pigments or measures of gold, but of the source of all true artistry, describing the creative act as a process of quiet listening, urging the craftsman to cleanse the noise from his soul so that the divine pattern, which already existed perfectly in the celestial realm, might flow unimpeded through his mind and down into his waiting hands. This artisan, whose signature upon the column suggested the name Theron, presented his life's work not as a collection of manufactured goods, but as a series of prayers rendered solid, each painted chest or carved sarcophagus being merely a temporary earthly vessel for a truth that was eternal and unchanging. Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude, realizing that the scroll was not a mere inventory, but a spiritual textbook, detailing the requisite patience and moral clarity needed to handle the sacred materials of the earth without profaning their inherent beauty. Further reading revealed meticulous instructions concerning the preparation of the workspace, emphasizing that true mastery began long before the brush touched the panel, insisting that the purity of the surrounding air and the stillness of the heart were as vital to the final result as the quality of the cinnabar or the clarity of the binding oil. Theron explained that every element gathered from the earth, the hard granite, the pliable linen, the deep blue lapis, held within it a silent narrative of its creation, a memory of the sun and the stone from which it sprang, and the skilled artisan's duty was to honor that inner history, drawing it forth gently rather than forcing it into a desired shape. He warned against haste, equating rapid production with spiritual blindness, suggesting that the true measure of a masterpiece lay not in its complexity or size, but in the time spent in quiet contemplation, allowing the design to ripen fully in the mind before being committed to the fleeting substance of the world. Such insights demonstrated a philosophy far removed from mere commercial enterprise, placing the entire process of creation within the highest sphere of sacred duty, where the hands of the maker served only as a bridge between the unseen and the tangible. The second segment of the scroll, titled The Weighing of Pigment and Soul, delved into specific, esoteric processes for the treatment and preparation of colors, detailing recipes for shades of green and ochre that Elias had previously believed were either lost entirely or achieved only by chance experimentation in the distant past. Theron gave precise measurements for grinding the malachite not only to the finest dust, but insisted that the act of grinding itself must be performed only during the moments when the moon was waxing, ensuring that the natural, growing power of the night sky was somehow infused into the mineral, thereby guaranteeing the vibrancy and longevity of the hue once applied. He further warned against mixing the royal pigments, such as gold dust and lapis, on common stone, demanding that a dedicated, smooth palette of pure alabaster, used for nothing else, be reserved for these most valuable of colors, treating the delicate mixture as if it were an offering meant for the highest altar. This blend of ritualistic precaution and practical chemistry demonstrated a holistic approach to the craft, recognizing the metaphysical forces that governed the world alongside the physical laws of material transformation. Deeper into the dense, flowing script, a section titled On the Persistence of the Sky offered a sudden, brilliant flash of technical illumination, addressing a mystery that had long vexed scholars studying the enduring vibrancy of the Old Kingdom murals. The precise method of fixing the delicate, costly blue derived from pulverized cobalt glass. Theron detailed a previously unknown process of soaking the prepared pigment in a warm infusion of desert acacia resin mixed with a precise measure of filtered rainwater gathered during the winter solstice, claiming that this ritualistic binding not only ensured the color's adherence to the stone, but also imbued the finished surface with a subtle, protective sheen that repelled the harsh, relentless dust of the desert air. Elias realized, with a sudden joyful shock, that this single passage provided the missing key to understanding the incredible preservation of the turquoise glaze on the sarcophagus discovered a century prior, a glaze whose brilliance had defied all previous attempts at chemical analysis or synthetic replication. The text confirmed that the ancient masters understood not just chemistry, but the subtle alchemy of time and natural substances, blending practical knowledge with inherited, ritual wisdom passed down through generations of silent practice. Hours passed in the cool subterranean silence, marked only by the low flicker of the lamp and the soft rustle of papyrus, as Elias absorbed the cumulative wisdom of Theron, whose scrolls contained 3 distinct sections: the Meditations on Form, the Handbook of Sacred Materials, and the final section dedicated to the instruction of the next generation of apprentices. The ancient master cautioned his students against allowing jealousy or pride to pollute their creation, reminding them that true skill was a gift held in trust, meant to serve the community and honor the divine architects, not to glorify the fleeting fame of the individual craftsman. He provided detailed diagrams for constructing the specialized wooden tools used in fine carving, tools shaped specifically to fit the contours of the human hand, demonstrating his belief that the instrument must feel like an extension of the wielder's own spirit, facilitating a seamless transfer of intention from mind to material. It was a humbling moment for the modern scholar to hold in his hands the very heart and soul of a man who had walked this earth 4,000 years ago, seeing now not a nameless historical subject, but a sensitive, dedicated human being striving for spiritual perfection through the diligent application of his earthly craft. As the lamp oil began to burn low, casting long, wavering shadows across the burial chamber, Elias turned to the last roll, which was much shorter and appeared to be a personal reflection rather than an instructional text, penned with an even finer, slightly shaky hand, suggesting it was written late in the artisan's life, perhaps in the final decade of his profound labor. This closing testament spoke of the ephemeral nature of all human achievement, comparing the most dazzling statue or the most perfectly painted mural to a fleeting ripple in the great river of eternity, acknowledging that while the objects he made were designed to endure, the most important work was the shaping of the self, the ceaseless effort to make the artist worthy of the gifts he had been granted. Thrawn closed his private journal with a simple, hopeful dedication. May the echoes be gentle, and may the light find its way. A subtle plea that his wisdom would not be swallowed entirely by the dust, and that someone, far distant in time, would one day receive the counsel he had meticulously preserved within the deep earth. Elias looked up from the script, his eyes wet with a mixture of reverence and sudden, overwhelming empathy, realizing that he himself was the answer to that ancient, quiet prayer, the recipient of the light Theron had desperately hoped would survive the long night of history. He had not merely found an artifact, he had established a dialogue, a silent conversation with a soul separated by epochs, but united by the enduring human commitment to beauty and meaning, demonstrating that the true treasure of archaeology lay not in the weight of the gold or the fame of the pharaohs, but in the intimate, enduring connections forged between the past and the present through the fragile medium of the written word. He carefully, meticulously secured the scrolls again, now imbued with a sacred importance far beyond their historical value, knowing that the work of translation had only just begun, promising to protect this rare window into the heart of the ancient world.